Live from Seattle with Tim Gatos continues on 820 AM. The Word.
Hey, we are back here. We are having a fascinating conversation with Todd Furniss, healthcare industry expert, the author of the new book, The 60% Solution, Rethinking Healthcare. And Todd, I know in our last few minutes here, there's so much I want to just ask you and talk about. Thinking about vaccinations, we're about 70% vaccinated right now, right, as a country, close to that. I mean, how many more of those folks who aren't had COVID and have antibodies, right, have that natural immunity? I mean, shouldn't we be maybe closer with both of those combined? I mean, shouldn't we be at 80, 90%?
Well, you're zeroing in on exactly the right question. And I'm as a guy sitting in Texas, I'm grateful that you sitting in Washington are reaching this conclusion, because it needs to spread wildly across the United States, which is this. About 70% of our country has been vaccinated at least once. About 60% of our population has been vaccinated twice. But what that seems to suggest is we're still not doing a good enough job. What people don't realize is that number is actually up significantly if you consider the percentage of people who've been vaccinated over the age of 12. In other words, more of our Americans have been vaccinated over the age of 12. And so if you take out that percentage of the population under 12, that's about 8% of our population, which I would assert probably shouldn't get vaccinated. So let's imagine the number is roughly 65%. I'm just going to use rounding numbers. And then you say 8% of those of our population are under 12. Now you're at 73%. Okay, well, let's imagine that, because the numbers show this, that about 10% of our population has had COVID, which means they have natural antibodies. So now you just bumped up from 72% to 82%. But let's imagine there's a little bit of overlap there between the people who've had COVID and who've gotten vaccinated, because some have done both. And so we can round that back down. Let's say we're still only at 75%. Then you've got about 5% of the country that has natural immunities at least. So now you're at 80%. And then you got to say, well, wait a minute. What about the women we talked about earlier who probably shouldn't get vaccinated? That's about 20% of our population. So again, you can consider that there's some overlap, but you got to be bumping up against at least 80, 85% of the population that either shouldn't be vaccinated because we haven't gotten to other medical conditions, shouldn't be vaccinated, or has been vaccinated, or has the antibodies already. So that's when I get worried, because one of the things I like to say is that rules are the enemy of judgment. And so what do I mean by that? If you have a blanket mandate that says everybody has to wear masks or everybody has to get vaccinated, that means that people are going to get hurt. That means that bad things are going to happen to people that shouldn't be included and subject to that rule. But the people who are enforcing the rule don't have to exercise any judgment because they can rely on the rule. So what I worry about is, what about that person has, is a susceptibility to blood clotting? That person shouldn't get vaccinated. What about somebody who just got through chemo and is a breast cancer survivor? That person shouldn't get vaccinated. So now if you say, well, you have an obligation, we're mandating that you get vaccinated, you're sending that person to an enormous health risk. And the other point would be, well, wait a minute, I've already had COVID. My antibodies are stronger than those produced by the vaccination. Why on earth would I do that? But that's not an acceptable answer. So you have to get vaccinated. Or you have to go sit in the cheap seats or no seats in the ballpark or the arena, or you can't go inside the restaurant in New York City right now.
Yeah, my goodness. So much to dive into here, Todd. I mean, this is really insightful. I mean, how would you encourage or give wisdom to someone who, is concerned about the vaccine, they're not an anti-vaxxer. But they realize that it's not, it's not a vaccine. It's still an experimental drug, hasn't been approved by the FDA. They're not like terribly concerned about it, yet at the same time, they're like, you know what? I'm healthy. I'm in good shape. I know COVID is, we know very clearly who COVID is going after, right? It's elderly, it's people who are very obese and who have significant health conditions. So I've got friends who are saying, man, I know who this is going after. do I really need to go get it? I mean, what would you say?
Americans are blessed with something as a country called common sense. And I think we need to rely on that. And so, for example, if I said, hey, Tim, the Supersonics are going to play the Dallas Mavericks, and you know what? They have a 99% chance of winning.
Wait,
Would
Todd.
you take that bet?
Todd, you just brought up the Supersonics? Oh, my gosh, Todd. You know, Oklahoma City stole them from us.
I'm just saying, would you bet on the game? Without getting into the cultural morass, would you bet on the game?
Yeah.
With a 99% chance, you'd say yes.
Yeah.
Right? So, of course you would. And if I said, hey, you know what? I put $1,000 worth of a chip on not dying from the Delta variant, if the numbers are 0.0007%, you're going to put the chip down, right? So that's the exercise of common sense. I think I said something before, which is that the obligation of diligence is on the reader. So that same message obtains with regard to the viewer and the listener. It's important that whoever is listening, watching, or reading thoughtfully inquire. They can't just take something at face value and not ask questions beyond that. And I would also say don't listen to your own echo chamber exclusively. Branch out, for God's sakes. Go watch CNN or MSNBC or Fox News or some other channel that you think that you don't often listen to just to get another perspective. But do some homework. And at the end of the day, it's all about common sense. If you're fit and you're healthy and you don't fall into the category of over 65, immune compromised, or morbidly obese, which I recognize there's some overlap there, then you can pretty much take care of yourself. You're in a pretty good spot. It's unlikely, very unlikely, that you're going to risk a serious problem from COVID, either variant, and it's very unlikely you're going to die. I'm not saying that we all haven't heard stories. We don't have friends who've suffered from the disease, but statistically, it's improbable. And so that's the way that I would encourage people. I think it's important to live as normal a life as possible, because what we're not talking about as much as we should probably be talking is the issue of mental health. And you've got to have a balanced mental health approach as well. And that means you have to have the ability of having family and friends and interacting with them on a regular basis and going to church and going to meetings and doing more than just sitting in your house and behind a closed door and not going outdoors.
Yeah, well said. Todd, been such a pleasure to have you. Where can folks pick up your book, The 60% Solution, Rethinking Healthcare? Thank you so much. It's available at Amazon or Todd Furniss, FURNISS.com. And one thing I'd like to do, you have another person out there who's doing some really interesting work, and her name is Tiffany Smiley. You'll hear about her coming up. She's got a really interesting story. I'd encourage you to bring her on your show. She's a really interesting person. Oh, very interesting. Hey, before you go, Todd, we got a quick caller. It's got a question for you. This is Lori. Lori, welcome to the show.
Hi, guys. Great show, as always. I'm just wondering, I've heard nothing about research going on about why kids don't get this. Is it their breathing rate? What do they have? And why is no one talking about research on this? Well, generally, first of all, thanks for calling in. I'm delighted that you called in. But I think that generally they have a higher immune system that's just working at a different level. Most of us, as we age, we have other problems that have made us a little bit more compromised. We've either put a few pounds on, or we've had a problem with smoking in the past, or other health concerns in the past. Many of us have had a form of pneumonia or another, and so that makes us a little bit more susceptible to these kinds of diseases. But the worst thing is if you've had a problem with smoking or if you're obese. Those are the two probably biggest problems, and most kids haven't done either. They don't have either of those problems. Okay, thank you. All right. Thanks, Lori, for calling in. And Todd, again, thank you so much for being with us today on the program. We really appreciate it. What a delight it's been to speak with you, Tim. I hope to have a chance to do it again. Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks, Todd. That was Todd Furniss, healthcare industry expert.